The so NERC. NERC's been successful at dealing with auditing and in some cases putting the fear of God into utilities because of the NERC SIP requirements and the $1 million a day fine for not being compliant in bulk transmission and generation. And I remember Mike Eccles saying it's generally led to much better security overall for the utility. However, again, I guess the one question I have is, among all of you there, and maybe it's not any of you, who is going to have authority, or who does have authority over distribution? And I know the first answer is going to be the states. Okay, who's got authority over the people in the states making the decisions? Because, again, somebody has to watch the watchers, right? And, whose job is that going to be, Aaron? Do you even know, or are we ever going to know that?
I'm not going to touch that with a 9.5-foot pole personally as FERC, but what I would say is that would, that's really up to states and their representatives on Congress. A lot of that has to. I'm not sure where exactly you'd want, and this would probably be a great question for the next panel as well. I don't know where exactly you'd want the authority to go to, and that's where Congress would come in. But it is left up to the states. FERC's not going to jump down to that level.
But then you're saying it's not going to be any of you?
No. There was one jurisdictional issue that did come up in our smart grid policy statement, where we did say, looking at smart grid interoperability standards, there could be interoperability standards that are on the distribution level that could affect the whole ESA language, which talks about wholesale markets, so on and so forth. But we recognize that our authority in ESA is voluntary. The standards that we are looking at are voluntary standards. So even if we identify something as being a quote-unquote adopted standard, that's not enforceable. So.
Okay, I think the suggestion that's good fodder for next session with the states is a good one. If you don't mind, I'm going to bring us back to the nascent initiative, which is an organizing principle of this panel, at least in theory, and that is the risk management process, the thing that is birthed, that is born of NERC and NIST starting to talk about some type of potential hybrid or fusion of the things that they've created so far, and or chaperoned so far. And so my question, which I'll pose to Bill first, I think, is it's being made right now, but how do you imagine this thing, this risk management process, supplementing existent regulations and guidance? How does it fit? How does it play well with other stuff that's in motion already?
Let me back up just a little bit to give you an idea. If you're familiar with the NIST 839 risk management process that has been published and just went final, I think yesterday or this week anyhow, it has basically 3 tiers to approaching identification and management of risk. One is at the mission level. The next layer down, if you will, next tier down, is the business processes associated with that mission. And then the bottom layer, bottom tier, is a system kind of focus. Cybersecurity traditionally has started at the bottom of that layer, and something else got done about identifying risk and this stuff. 839, that 3 levels, that 3 tiers is the general concept we're trying to take with the risk management process. That's one of our goals. The idea is to start talking about the mission risk, not just cyber risk. We've got to include the risk from cyber issues in addition to financial risk, physical risk, all of the risks that corporate level organizations are going to be taking on for their entire organization. Cyber is a piece of that. When you move down another layer into the business processes, you begin to get more specialized in terms of cybersecurity. Again, you're looking at risk, not how to. This is a process. The bottom layer is the systems. Now, the business process layers and the system layers we think is going to wind up needing to diverge. We have to acknowledge that the kinds of risks you encounter for power systems is significantly different than you would encounter for the normal business or IT side of the business. We know a lot of things about how to do cybersecurity, risk management, like for normal traditional IT systems. The power systems is one we got to take another look at. We're trying to evolve it in that fashion. I'm not sure I answered the question, but that's the general approach we're trying to take. The models that we've got is that when we get down to that bottom layer, where you start talking about how things get applied to systems, how do you apply risk management to systems, the idea is that process should then refer you to the NIST IR to go look at that control system, that catalog of controls, cybersecurity requirements, and help you pick those that would apply to your, whether it's your email server or your control system. Not describing how you do that, but link you to those kinds of documents, the NIST 832, the DHS control system catalog. All of those documents that are out there, the risk management process should lead you to using those as references when you start making those selections, kind of thing. There's been some discussion about how we can map all of this back to the current NERC SIP standards. We've also started talking about how we can pare them down to this minimum set of minimum requirements and then layer the risk management process on it. But the intent is to work through these layers, and the bottom layer, the bottom tier, would then say these are the reference documents you use to select your individual cybersecurity controls that you're going to apply to your system, whether it's your meter system for your small co-op or the meter system for the large IOU utility or generator or whatever.
I like the three-part stack that leads off with mission. I have a feeling in some ways that resonates with me, where, as I said, in the DOD, fuel and energy efficiency and energy strategy was considered a nice to have. Some people are interested in that, but that's not core to the mission. And security has always been, for long-time practitioners, that's the thing that happens at the end. It's the thing that gets slighted if we have a pinch. We gotta get other stuff done. Then we'll make sure security happens. The same recognition that the DOD had in the energy example of this is elemental to our mission. We don't do the mission without focusing on this, and it's not a secondary or tertiary issue. I think we can somehow communicate that culturally to leadership, to ourselves too, because we've been living in this kind of second-class citizen world sometimes as security people. I think we'll have made significant progress. Mark, would you like to weigh in on Bill's comments from your own perspective?
Only my perspective, because I haven't been engaged with the discussions between Mark and Jerry and NIST on this. But you know, I'm excited about the development of the know-how, so that industry will have an ability to, with their own set of goals and jurisdictional requirements, be able to meet, you know, the level of cybersecurity that they're comfortable with. That said, there's obviously, as my colleagues allude to, there has to be a minimum amount so that we can ensure the reliability of the bulk power system. And I think that, you know, having that process available will enable folks to use whatever different tools they have available to get to that level.
Okay.
So we're excited about the lineup, and also excited that it's not going to be just a federal government-run effort, that the outreach now to industry, which is going to be fundamental to its success, I think is an important step.
Folks in the audience, don't forget, with time winding down, it's not often that you get these three agencies all in the same place together where you could potentially point at one of them and see what the other one does. So don't necessarily wait for somebody to say you can ask questions now. I follow the Amati model, follow the state of California's model, step right up and speak your piece. Hit it.
Yes, indeed. As Chris Wheeler out with California PUC. This question is mainly to Bill. The risk management process initiative. Who from the states are going to be involved in this initiative?
One of the things I have asked Miles Keel, I think it is, from NERC, to go find me somebody who can be an active participant. Am I hearing a volunteer?
He's
We'll
writing
see.
it down, that's right.
Did you realize this was a possible outcome
You're
of
not
you asking that question?
I did not know that was,
Not answer Miles'
I have not
phone
heard
call.
anything from Miles. That's not necessarily that's not necessarily meaningful, but I'm glad to hear that you did reach out to NERC to get some volunteers.
But we do need some folks like yourselves, and I've talked a little bit with Miles, we've been going different directions. But I do want a couple of folks from the PUC group to participate, particularly in our subject matter expert internal review panel. We can't afford to have any more than about the 15 or 16 people we've got around our core development team. As usual, you can't write anything by committee. The intent is to do the initial drafting, come up with the concept and stuff like that, get inputs from the subject matter expert team. And, you know, if you'd like to volunteer, I'd be glad to relay your name to Miles.
Okay, that's fine.
That's Chris Villarreal,
Yeah.
State of California.
And I have one other question. This is for Mark. NERC, I believe, earlier this year issued a list of 6 items that are going to be their top priority items, I believe.
There was 8, yeah.
There's 8. And the last one was cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's unfortunate that the original list was approximately 5, and in the first paragraph, it says in priority order. I wouldn't suggest that they ultimately ended up being in priority order if that's what you're going to.
That was where I was going is,
But that being said, I mean, there are other elements, for example, you know, that we didn't have on the list, so, but yeah, I don't think they're in rank order.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think security is very much higher on the, you know, and I'm glad you didn't ask me about the state rights thing, because we have to point to the, I have to point to
Our
the-
lawyer who is responsible for the state's rights arguments is just retired.
Oh.
So now we are also going to be trying to find someone, hopefully not necessarily in California, but somewhere in the western area to deal with the state, with the jurisdictional issues.
Got it, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Presenting Darren Heifel.
All right, more open question with regards to how regulatory structure, regulation, you know, meets and works with and enables, facilitates technical guidance and application. And specifically, I know, you know, there's probably some sensitive questions right now, you know, a lot of them stemming from the technical conference. You know, what does adoption mean, and that sort of thing. Whether things are voluntary or not, even if they're not voluntary at the federal level, you know, what if somebody comes along at a more local level and decides, well, you know, it seemed like a good idea to them, therefore we'll go ahead and make it mandatory. It seems like we need some form of, I know at the technical level at least, we need some kind of pretty uniform acceptance of what is, you know, what is baseline security that we need to be doing. I mean, that's, if anything, that's what the smart grid has illustrated to me, is that issues, you know, in a chip on a circuit board can propagate up to where they are system-wide concerns. So if that is a model that can be, you know, illustrated, you know, at the governance level, I mean, how do we use our regulatory structure? How do we deal with our regulatory constraints to coordinate on this front, and at the same time, you know, encourage, you know, and facilitate us all to converge on the same level of technical solution without, you know, binding ourselves in knots and creating a lot of confusion in terms of who has authority over what.
Okay. I'll take a quick stab at that. For the regulatory fragmentation environment, that was one of the concerns that was raised in the GAO report. I know that was brought up earlier this week regarding what we do about it, collaborate, it's one of the 6 challenges. We have a FERC NERC collaborative for smart response that we have Commissioner Norris at the commission who sits on it. It's a commission-to-commission organization that's been set up. We've been meeting regularly to try to discuss that. And one of the things that did come up about, adoption is voluntary for FERC. We've said that in the policy statement. But there could be the concern that, another regulatory body could take the stand and say, well, if FERC says they're good enough to be adopted, then they're good enough to be mandatory. Some of the states that we've been talking to, and I'm not going to say that we've talked to all the states, have looked at following what NERC is whatever FERC is going to end up doing as a good model. There seems to be an idea that the collaboration would be best, and I think all the regulators, and taking that as blanket of a statement as you can, because I can't speak on behalf of the commission, let alone all other regulators, seem to think that collaboration is the best idea going forward. In terms of not binding us to one technical solution, the commission is said very publicly that we will remain technology neutral. For the SIP standards, for example, and as much criticisms as there are for the SIP standards that we've been hearing, especially over the past couple of days, they tell you the how. I mean, they don't tell you the how. They tell you the what you're supposed to be able to achieve, what the requirement is to get to X, Y, and Z. They don't tell you how to get there. And that's something that the commission, if you look at all the other reliability standards, also doesn't say. We don't look at your balancing authority and tell it how you have to, maintain ACE. It's just not something that. So does that kind of answer both of those questions? We are collaborating. And one of the things in the GAO, they also said they want us to collaborate with the munis and the co-ops, and that's something that we've also started to engage in as well. We've had discussions with APPA and NRECA to try and get the conversation going, and Annabelle's just standing right in front of you, but that's okay, it's a little distracting.
No, sorry, just a quick, because I just got an email, because we talked about it earlier. They changed the dates for comment submission for the FERC.
Yeah.
So I wanted to let everybody know.
45s.
April 8th for the original and April 22nd for, if you're not on the list, for the
Yeah.
second submission. So April 8th and April 22nd now.
See, that happened, I wasn't even at the commission, that's just magical right
And
there.
I thank you when I say it. I'd like to add to that, and because from NERC's perspective, we are concerned about, again, the reliability of the bulk power system. And so how do we address attack vectors or worries because we're getting a substantial amount of generation that's lower than 20 megawatts on the distribution system, et cetera. And I think that my colleague from FERC has it right, and that is it's going to take collaboration and develop guidelines together. Again, they're not binding, but it helps enable people to share in expertise and knowledge of what's going on in each one of the states, et cetera. And so my view is that, and NERC, of course, we're still trying to get the standards right, can work with industry and regulators on guidelines to help support the states and the decisions they need to make.
All right, thanks. We're going to.
I'm sorry, you shut me off again. Okay.
I don't want you to feel that way. I'd like you to think that
Guidelines, that's right.
we're down to.
I'm done.
We're down. Thanks a lot. We're down to our final question. This is Eric from National Grid. Please state your last name.
My last name is Hacker.
Okay, thank you.
That's why the sticker's on the laptop, because it identifies my laptop. I really appreciate the risk assessment process that's being formulated. It's something that needs to be done. Having an industry standard is going to be very helpful. The problem that I'm seeing is I work for an investor-owned utility, and they always say, well, this is going to cost money. And unless there's some emphasis on the fact that, yes, you're recommending guidelines, but these guidelines are going to go down to the PUCs, and the PUCs are going to say, okay, do this. If the PUCs aren't saying, well, we recognize that this is going to have a rate impact when we say to do this, then there's going to be a conflict within the organizations, at least for some period of time. And they're going to try to not adopt it as much as they probably should. So can you comment on the resource aspect of doing these risk assessments, perhaps some metrics around, doing some test runs before it really becomes, okay, this is what we need to do. We've tried this within organizations. We've come up with some metric to say this is how long it takes to do this to what we deem as an acceptable level. So the PUCs have some real information to work from in going forward.
A real quick response, we talked about that very topic at this NERC boot camp with commissioners and their staff. We touched on it a little bit and tried to make them aware that when they consider the filings that come before them, they've got to take this into account. The cybersecurity cost, the cost recovery that's needed to accomplish this stuff. Based on what I've heard from most of the IOUs, the risk management process that we're laying out conceptually is consistent with what's already being done. I view it as a very large benefit to the communities and the co-ops. And one of the reasons I want the utilities at the table is to make sure we don't do anything for the large IOUs who are providing a bulk of the power, that we don't do anything that says you got to go retool everything you're doing. We've got to make sure we stay consistent to minimize that kind of impact. But your point about the utility commissions desperately needing resources and the skills to be able to interact in a meaningful way with the utilities to figure out the path forward for them is a big one. We're going to have to figure out how to solve that. And as I was telling Chris this morning after our panel, I will talk to Pat and see if we can find a way to leverage some resources back to the utility, to the state level. They desperately need it.
I knew that, given our time constraints, that Bill would deliver a succinct but brilliant response, so you've got it. And I'll say, if you don't mind, Mike, can we please have a round of applause for these excellent panelists?